Good afternoon and welcome to this week's edition of Finweek Money Matters, the show that helps you manage your finances. I'm Alicia Seck. My co-host, as usual, is Mark Ashton, editor of Finweek. Coming up on today's show, we take a closer look at the local gaming industry and find out about its high-earning, fiercely loyal and highly intelligent target market as we unmask the South African gamer. July is savings month and we delve into South African savings habits and unpack the debt to savings ratio. Later on in the show, we explore new developments taking place in the venture capital markets and see how legislation is encouraging investments in this sector. You can read more about these stories and many others in this week's edition of Finweek on the shelf from today. The magazine is also available digitally in English and Afrikaans, and that via mysubs.co.za. Please do send any comments or feedback to moneymatters@abn360.com. Well, globally, the gaming industry is bigger than both Hollywood and the music industry. Finweek takes a closer look at the local gaming industry and finds a high-earning, fiercely loyal and highly intelligent target market, the South African gamer. So does the local gaming industry offer opportunities for developers, distributors and professional gamers? Well, joining me to dissect the state of the local gaming industry is developer and sharp mind behind Toxic Bunny, Travis Bulford. We're also joined by Colin Webster, the president of Mind Sports South Africa, and Finweek journalist Jessica Hubbard with us at the desk as well. Welcome to you all. Thanks so much for joining me. So we're fighting perceptions against reality today. Take us through the focus. What was this article about? Is it all about demystifying the gaming industry?
Yeah, we've been working on the story for a while now, and in fact, being part of NASPAS, we obviously get an opportunity to see a lot of the developments of where NASPAS is taking their business internationally, and that includes gaming in markets like China. And so we've always been fascinated by this idea that companies are pouring big money into the development of gaming industry. You know, the idea that somebody would trade $100 for a virtual avatar, I mean, it's mind-boggling, but people do it. It's created this almost subculture, and I think that what's happened though is that there's a perception of the gamer being the sort of dingy nerd in the corner. And what's very interesting is, obviously, I'm now in my 30s. I look around at my social circle, and my mates will rather spend $600 on a game than go out for dinner. It sounds daft, but that's what they're doing.
So let's break down the demographic then, Travis, and if you can do this for us, because apparently you cater to the most sought-after demographic for any marketer at the moment. So break down the gaming demographic for us.
Okay, you've got to break the demographic into two parts: people who are playing by hours and people who are spending money. So obviously, focus in terms of my interest is the people spending money, and it's similar to the people playing, but your target market globally is 36 plus is the biggest spend on games. The growing market is 33 plus women at the moment. It's the fastest growing market out there. So the perception of the 18-year-old playing the computer games is still true, and he probably plays more hours. But in terms of the spending power and the person with the actual money, that's actually your 30 plus market.
A lot of that, Colin, having to do with the fact that we're looking at a changing middle class, and that has many implications. We know that Africa as a whole has stood on the radar screen very starkly because of that growing middle class specifically.
Yes, you are looking at a change in the middle class, but what you've also got to look at is within the gaming community, you're looking at a very broad spectrum. You're not just looking at people who are going to be professionals or people who are going to be amateurs. There's a whole wide scope, and that's something that's very important to take into account when you're looking at gamers and gaming.
Travis, I mean, one of the questions maybe I'll throw to you to start off with. You talk about women coming through the marketplace. I mean, you know, I can understand a guy who goes out and spends money on games. I get it. So I chat to Simon Dingle, who's our tech expert, and ask him, you know, what's the ultimate setup? And he says, go and buy these 4 games, buy these 4 consoles, get everything. This is the ultimate setup. And I can't picture going, and maybe this is sexist, but I can't picture asking the same. I'll throw the question to Jess as well. You know, go and ask him about buying this kind of setup, and how is that demographic changing and what's driving it?
Okay, it's a different game demographic entirely. It's not necessarily the same game. So guys playing Battlefield and shooting each other, you're not seeing 50% female, 50% male. But you go into a retail shop and the guys are buying a game for $800 or $600 and they're going home and they're very excited. And you see a lady in her mid-40s walk in and buy a hidden treasure game, and she'll buy 1,000 rands worth of these games. So she's buying 5, 6, 7 titles at $200 each, and she's walking out same amount of money, same interest, just a slightly different demographic.
Jessica, do you have any of these games stashed away?
I don't. I'm not much of a gamer myself. But what I did want to point out was that compared to, say, 10 years ago, I think the nature and content of games has changed dramatically. So games used to be the typical Star Wars type setup where you're shooting the bad guys and the Dooms where you have the big guns. And I think developers are more and more starting to recognize they need to do the more subtle sort of seeking out intelligence-focused games where you're looking for clues. So there's those treasure games you mentioned. And then there's also quizzes. So women are fond of quiz-type games, you know, the setup that you'd find in Cosmo, where you answer quizzes and you get feedback, and then you answer to get to the next round. So the content of games is appealing to a much wider audience.
Well, let's play a game right now. Let's find the cell phone that's causing interference on our lines this afternoon.
I actually did switch it off and it didn't listen.
There we go.
I took its battery out. It didn't want to listen.
These things don't die.
No.
You've got to kill them completely.
Korean logic.
There we go. So let's move on with conversation now. I mean, it's very interesting because what it does is it throws the spotlight on the consumer right now. It's a consumer we've seen come under pressure to an extent that it's been reflected in some of the retailers' performances as well. Of course, that's been very specific too. But what are we looking at here then? A recession-proof industry?
I mean, I think it's an interesting one because do you call it recession-proof? And I think what we term recession-proof is the fact that they sit in a high LSM, they're employed. You know, when you're employed, what do? You tend to buy nice TVs, you tend to have access to the internet. I mean, even a simple thing on gaming, you know, you go and you look at, it drives me nuts, but my wife used to play Facebook games the whole time. She could spend hours. And the only reason she can play those games is because she has access to the internet. And I think that what we term ultimately recession-proof is because they have access to the technology that's able to make games easy. I mean, you're constantly having these games thrown at you, and it's an opportunity to keep playing. So high-end demographic it kicks in there.
Well, with that then, what growth have you seen over the course of the last couple of years, let's say?
Well, I think you would need to speak to somebody in more retail, considering we're doing software development. But what I have seen globally is more and more of the entry-level games are getting more attention, and the big AAA titles are starting to come under strain. And I think it is a price issue. People are going, well, 800 Rand for a title for my kids to play, or 4 titles for 200 Rand, they'd rather go and get the 4 titles. The odds are better that there'll be more longevity in the gameplay, and that's the logic we're seeing. So I'm not sure if that's based on the recession or just based on the maturing of the market. Access to the tools to make better games is coming in at a lower level, so a lot of entry-level games are better and better and better, and that's making them more attractive. So the AAA studios are struggling quite a bit by comparison.
And when you're looking at the local industry and the growth of games, you need to mention mobile. Mobile is a huge factor, and because most South Africans have at least one mobile phone, and they're playing the majority of their games on their mobile phones these days, if you're talking about the majority of South Africans. That is a huge opportunity for advertisers as well, and it's an area where they're really starting to focus on.
That's a very important point to highlight, Colin, because I mean, I was looking, the financial barrier to entry is fairly high, with the average console costing between 3,000 and 5,000 Rand, the average gaming PC costing up to 13,000 Rand, and then the games themselves, a whole different ball game. So, you know, that's a very important point that Jessica's highlighted.
Yes, and you see, this is what's driving a lot of the different fields in gaming at the moment. So gaming, quite frankly, is in a lot of flux. You have a lot of free online games which people can play. You might look at the console gaming being quite expensive per unit. But what we found, especially in a lot of our work in terms of development in Cape Town, is that you have a lot of people from previously disadvantaged backgrounds who can play console games because they're more open to the market. It doesn't require the same high level of knowledge base in order to play a console game as what it does in order to play a PC game. So 2 years ago, we did quite a big development with City of Cape Town where we literally bust kids in. And it was great fun. And I think this is something that you have to look at. And you find also, funny enough, when you're looking at games and the gender base, You sometimes find that it's surprising which games actually attract different genders. We have a very young and dynamic club at Rodin High School, which is great fun. And in fact, a lot of the young ladies actually play games like Tekken, which are fighting games, and you ideally would say, well, that's a bit strange. But I don't know, maybe it's a way of getting...
So letting go of frustration, it's an avenue to vent.
Well, definitely. But where we do find women actually far surpass men, and we run a texting competition. And there at our last national championships, had 77,000 participants, of which over 60% were women. And not only that, but it's largely based because women have better social skills and, of course, fine motor coordination.
Another aspect driving the uptake of games, and which is also attracting women, is the fact that games are now becoming more social. So they're linked into your social networks. Mixit is a great example of this. Most of their games, they're multiplayer games. You're playing at the same time as your friends. You're sharing things with them online while you're playing. So the social element and tying them into your immediate community and your friends is also driving the uptake of games amongst a wider community and a wider and a younger, older, everybody, females, males. They all want to play and join in and participate with each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Travis, maybe, the thing that I always say, show me the money in it. Are we actually going to see any money in this thing? And I think, one of the things that did come through is that there are opportunities out there. I think
opportunities are great.
There's a marketplace out there, there's a consumer, there's somebody to consume a product. Obviously, to go, you can't, it's very difficult to compete against international players that can throw hundreds of millions of rands into development. What are the opportunities as a South African business in this space?
Actually, the first mistake would be to compete with the guys throwing hundreds of millions of rands into these. You don't need to compete at that tier. That's a AAA tier. And as I said, it's struggling more and more in the current economy. And the entry-level games and even the indie scene, which is it's a name for the guys making games out of their garage, essentially. There's a whole rule about how you describe yourself. Like I said, it's a bit of a trend. But nonetheless, those are growing up. And some of those actually do very well. If you take a game like Minecraft, the number of sales is somewhere in the 11 million units. That was an indie team who built that game. So there's a lot of indie teams who make it really big. There's also a lot of indie teams who just fall off into obscurity. But there's still a good opportunity to grow an industry, make money out of computer games, and do it from here. We don't need hundreds of millions to compete. We need a more reasonable approach, and what we really need is access. And that's the challenge, access to international market.
Sure, but I think that's where you touch on something that I picked out of the article, is that essentially you can develop whatever you want. It's a case of how does it fit onto a platform. And I mean, we've seen the debate whether it's iTunes or Amazon Books or whatever. The reality is only what you need to be able to get into these outlets to be able to push the product. And that's my question is, how do you start a business and actually get it into the international marketplace?
Well, I'm trying to answer that question as we sit here, so that is part of it. One of the things is a lot of the South African teams are focused purely on digital distribution. Last year's stats put digital distribution at 15% of the market. So it's still small compared to the boxed product and the total price. Some of that's because the digitals sell for $9 and the box sells for $40. So you sell one box, you have to sell 4 digital products. But the other thing is digital uptake still taking time. Boxed uptake, you get a box, people still believe in buying something and being able to take it home and hold it and feel it, even though they're gamers. And also they find out what they want by going to the shops and speaking to other experts who know they bought that product, they like this one. So we've got to get into the box channels in the UK and in the US, and obviously the digital channels are a little bit more accessible, but they still have their barriers. For example, iTunes, we've just uploaded onto that, and we're waiting for authorization. But Sony Mobile, we need to be from the UK. Xbox Live Arcade has to be from the UK. Android can only be sold from, well, not just the UK, but we have a business set up there, so we can do these channels. Otherwise, we can't even do them from South Africa. I don't know if it's legislation or if it's just too small, those companies don't care for the effort to sign up our economy, but it doesn't make it inaccessible. It just means we have to go through a few extra hoops, and we can.
One of those hoops is finding funding sources as well. I mean, just how tricky is that? Because the article highlighting your experience specifically, where you had to shut down due to a lack of funding between 2001 and 2010.
The market also went through a very serious lull, and we lost access. We were going through Electronic Arts at the time to get international access, and Doom came out and pretty much killed the market for about 4 years. So we fell away with that. But part of it was also getting funding. And at that stage, if, as I said in the article, if you go and you say, we want to make a game, that's it, you're dead, right?
That's it. You actually said, first
Go
of
on,
all,
you're
it's
out.
games. That's a terrible word to start any business proposal with.
However, when you start off with, it's the largest electronic industry in the world, maybe we get a little bit more interest out of people. I think there's a couple of things to keep in mind. The current decision makers have seen a lot more games and probably a lot more comfortable with it. So hopefully that'll make a difference in terms of getting funding. The challenge is also you need a track record to get your funding. People aren't just going to come to you with a bag of money and say, there you go. They're going to say, well, how safe is my bag of money? And our local market still doesn't have a lot of traction in terms of history. So a few extra titles, whether they succeed financially or not, just to show you can build them and actually go through that process and get that confidence is still a very important step for any investor.
And you mentioned that it takes up to 2 years to
It
develop
can
a
take
game,
about
which
2
is
years,
also
yes.
Colin, maybe I want to throw this to you. Is like, how do you go and bring in what do you need to do in changing the infrastructure to be able to make gaming a viable industry in South Africa?
Well, if you're looking at what really happened in South Korea, it shows you the sort of the development of the gaming industry, and that is you had a lot of gamers, and that led towards the development of games. So much so that there's TV channels now just dedicated to gaming. Another good example is perhaps Slytherin. That's a little company based in England, who I know quite well. And what you found there is that they actually specialise particularly on what you would call war games, games based on World War II or ancient history, designed exclusively almost for just iPods and things, so they're looking at a very specific market, and you see the market overseas is big enough for all of that. In South Africa it's not, it's small. I mean, you're talking about MWeb has about 65,000 users on online. If you go to a country like Lithuania, which is a teeny tiny population, they have over 100,000. And it's all based really on our relative socio-economic problems.
But is it that, or is it education? Because I think you use the South Korea example. South Korea is a highly educated market, whereas, and that in turn stimulates development and stimulates technology. I don't necessarily buy the argument that the South African gaming industry, or South African, a lot of South African tech industries are simply too small. I believe it's a case of education, and as the education gets dragged up, so does earnings power, and then you end up dragging those people into the net.
Well, definitely. Look, I mean, you can't disassociate it from education. I mean, to do that would be foolish.
Sure.
But what you are looking at is it's the number of people who are, frankly, just employed. I mean, South Africa now only has a population of 4 million taxpayers. It's a small economy. I don't care what anybody says. And that's something that we have to look at. I mean, but it is, gaming, I believe, is one of the solutions to South Africa's economic problems, because it is a way of actually bringing money into the country. And through that, you see, and that's one of our concepts, is that by promoting, gaming as a sport, that people can now get Protea colours for it, that school kids can get provincial colours. You're actually accrediting people, and you're actually building the concept that gaming isn't something that just happens for somebody in a bedroom.
It's one thing building it, another thing considering the limitations we've got to work with. So let's bring the bandwidth limitation into the equation here.
Right.
How much of a stress is that putting in your books, Travis, on what's possible?
The networking here. I can tell you we weren't prepared for the international market primarily. We went to market going, here's all our screenshots. People went, where's your video? We're like, we don't watch videos, it's too slow. They're going, no, it's all they want is a video. So little things like that we've had to realize. You're dealing with the rest of the world, they have internet. And I know we have internet, but not a sort of tier like that.
I could probably chuck in some, personal experience. I use Steam as a download service, and I downloaded Championship Manager on it recently, and it literally took me the entire day to download a game. And of course, as you hit your cap and it falls over, you start again. And you've paid the 700 Rand for the game. You've spent the whole day downloading it. You've actually gone through your entire internet cap getting it there, and now you've got to go and make this. And now, it's a hard sell to be able to get this as a game that you can ultimately use. And I think that's the issue that we face.
Well, it certainly faces our economy, but it doesn't face my business that much at this point, because I'm ultimately I think it's more difficult because I try to upload the game. So, you know, for the last 3 days, I've uploaded 1.2 gigs a day for 3 days because the first 1.2, no, that one, you did this slightly wrong. Please upload it again tomorrow. You're going, okay, now the 1.2 gigs. And that is quite a strain. But ultimately, it's not our biggest challenge. I think it affects the general industry quite badly, but it doesn't affect us for developing games that much.
But how do you see that playing out going forward? Because a lot of the guys, I mean, Microsoft had to switch from saying you can only play some of our games online. You had to be connected to the internet, and that's a trend the industry is going towards, having to be connected.
That's a bit different. If you're thinking about the Xbox One debacle, that was all about, we want to see when you're playing your game. Oh, and your webcam will be on, and we might be watching you and not telling you. There was a lot more going on there than just you have to be online. If I want to play a single-player game, I don't want to have to be online, and that's global. That's not just.
So is that going to persist, that you don't have to be online for quite a while?
They did a full 180 on that very quickly. I think they had to.
One of the things that you actually find about the whole online concept is that in South Africa, it's had almost a reverse action in terms of what it's done in Europe and America. In South Africa, it's actually killed the LAN, where people love to go and exchange ideas and play together with their friends, which is actually a very important part of gaming. In Europe, in America, Asia, it's not a problem. You go in there, you have a LAN, and it's all got internet connectivity. We can do that through the universities. But beyond that, we have a very real problem because of the poor internet connectivity that we have here. I mean, so for example, we had a team at the beginning of the year which actually did very well on international competition, although it never left South Africa. But the lag it had to deal with was absolutely phenomenal. So you have to use basically universities who have got direct access to CCOM and who are willing. But you can't do it really from anywhere else. And you see, and that in itself is a huge impediment to the actual growth of gaming.
Yeah. With that being the growth, I mean, what are the kind of risks that developers of games have got to be cognizant of going into this space?
Obviously, there's the risk that you do something that completely flops and you never make any money back. That's quite a simple risk. The other thing is to get as much feedback as possible early to try and mitigate that and engage people. Also, the modern audience requires that you tell them what you're doing every day. So it's no longer, here's our product and we just release it and it's a big explosion. It's, hey,
you've got to create the hype.
You have to create the hype, which means if you aren't telling people what you're doing, then you aren't doing anything. And it's a very different market, but it's a nice thing.
So who's doing that successfully? Could you give us an example of who's showing you where they are at the stage of development and creating a buzz?
Okay, well, a lot of the big international AAA studios do that, but they hire massive staff to do it on a daily basis. We have dedicated staff that actually just tweet and SMS and do the Facebook. I think there's 40 different forums that they have to check every day to see if there's been a post or response, because somebody sends a question and you don't answer, you don't care. And you've got to show that you care, and that's actually quite a serious job. So it's gone from marketing, meaning put an ad in this and demographic that, to actually engaging with the users as you progress with your campaign.
Sure, I mean, there is one, I mean, I know Danny Day in Cape Town is very good at a user platform like Twitter, for instance, to be able to give you updates on the game. You know, he's developed the game, he's giving you updates, he's saying, well, it's been published here and here are updates for it. And I mean, I do think that's where social media becomes very, very useful, because you're able to you are able to follow the game as you're able to follow the development, and it's amazing what one guy or one very small team can be able to put together with a limited set of resources.
Yes, that really is what makes gaming interesting again now from a development point of view. Is we don't need as much to get in to make the game. The real barriers at the moment are penetrating the market, not building
And what
the
about
product.
when it comes to skills? Do we have the skills in this country?
Yes, definitely. There's a lot of IT skills, a lot of skilled programmers. We've got a very well-established marketing industry, the movie industry that's growing in Cape Town with this all contributes, sound, all of that is covered.
So, Colin, you know, as a consumer of this, I mean, are you made aware enough? Do you think there's enough awareness triggered by developers out there in terms of what's in the pipeline, what the market can be expecting?
Well, look, we get quite a lot of information, mainly through the international body. We're more concerned, you know, with games that are, shall we say, have an even playing field, because it's important that, you know, when you're taking a team to Romania to play, you know, they're playing the same game. And you have the same chance. It's a lot of money involved in that. But yes, we do get to see quite a lot of what's going on. Our biggest frustration actually is, quite frankly, with a lot of the overseas companies, where in order for us to actually provide a good service, we need to have a server for that game in the country. And the companies are quite, well, blasé about it, from a point of view that it's actually not just a big enough market.
So that creating another opportunity then for local developers to tap into. How are you rating innovation overall within the gaming industry locally?
Well, actually, we've had some incredible successes. We've helped a number of people to do things, especially at Wits University and UCT. And they've actually won awards overseas for games, but largely these are games for cell phone applications.
With that, and I have to say it, it's game over.